Hello and welcome to another episode of Double Feature, the internet movie review show where a horror whore and an anime addict swap films to persuade each other how awesome our favourite genres actually are. This week I gave Alan...
This week Mike gave to me Fright Night, the 1985 horror classic about a horror-obsessed high school student who believes that his newly moved in next door neighbour is in fact a vampire. And funnily enough, no one else will believe him when he tries to explain to them that the man is a vampire, even though he has seen him burying some rather large trash bags in his back garden, and a local call girl, I suppose you could decide to class her as, has recently gone missing.
Slut. Sorry. No.
Lowering the tone.
Sorry.
But yeah, effectively now his next door neighbour takes a shine to the young man's girlfriend, and needless to say he's a little bit alarmed about this. So he turns to the only man he thinks can still help him, the former horror actor turned late night movie host Peter Vincent. Now, he is understandably reluctant to believe the young man that his next door neighbour is a vampire, but he goes along with this, and I think it's safe to say that hijinks ensue as they...
Hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue as the vampire Jerry... Do you remember his last name?
No, doesn't matter.
As vampire Jerry, played by Chris Sarandon.
Vampire Jerry.
Jerry. He eventually does show his hand as an all-powerful denizen of the night.
So, what did you think of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in a way I kind of think maybe it was a mistake to tackle this so soon after an American Werewolf in London in a way. I think it's riding the same kind of line between sort of comedy and horror as they did with that, but I think it maybe didn't quite meld the two just quite so well. I mean, I think the emphasis is very much on the comedy, I think, but it's got, there's a lot of, I mean, the effects are very well handled. I think there's also a lot of emphasis on the kind of gore elements to it as well, particularly towards the end of the film. Yeah, I think it was a very entertaining film. It didn't feel like quite a classic in the same way that American Werewolf was, but I thought, saying that, I thought the performances were very good. I mean, particularly Roddy McDowall as Peter Vincent. He absolutely steals every scene that he's in.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
And I think it would be nice if they maybe developed his character a little bit more, but I mean, I think it's very much a teen movie.
There is a sequel.
Yeah, oh yes, there is. Yeah, I've not seen that yet, but I think it is very much a teen movie. I think it speaks the language of the teen movies of that time. I think it's it does almost feel like a sort of horror version of Ferris Bueller at times.
Yeah, it's got that sort of that time. It captures that sort of feel good feel almost.
I mean, it almost seems to be kind of referencing some of the other films of that period. I mean, I thought the scenes of Brewster and his girlfriend being chased through the streets were kind of reminiscent of the Terminator. And I thought
the lighting was like really similar. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that actually, but it is really similar.
But I think as well as Roddy McDowall, and Chris Sarandon is very good in the film as Jerry the Vampire.
Yeah, Jerry the Vampire.
That should be a TV show. But because I think if it wasn't for the fact that it's made quite explicit that he has bumped off the call girl at the beginning of the film, you could almost feel sorry for him in a kind of a way, because I think he brings a certain humanity to the role. I mean, there's the scene where he first confronts Brewster and it becomes obvious that he is in fact a vampire. He does give him the choice, or at least appears to give him the choice that you can forget all about this, and
nothing will happen to you.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, even the scenes where he seduces Brewster's girlfriend, you do get the face because she is
from Married with Children.
Is that her?
I think so. Is that not Marcy?
Could well be. Jeez, I never noticed that. But it's because even in that, there is a certain humanity to the scenes. I think that the role could easily not have had, and I think they play with that again. I think later on there's quite an affecting death scene. I won't say quite who because it'd be a spoiler. But I think there is a slightly sort of touch of humanity and melancholia to the film. I think it's got a lot of good elements about it. I don't think they sat together quite as well as they did in the American Werewolf in London. Really, was the only thing.
I think though what I would say is that American Werewolf in London, is a horror film but it's a very strong comedy as well. I think you're right. I think the thing with Fright Night is that it's not frightening. I think what Fright Night to me is a love letter to the old, not necessarily too specifically like the old Hammer horror films, but the experience that people had watching them.
Yeah.
And I completely identify with Fright Night, even now when, you know, I remember watching it when I was a kid and I loved it. But in the 1990s, I watched one of those shows where it was Dr. Terror, you had a horror host and you would watch two films, be late on a Friday night, and that's the kind of experience that's going on in that film, and I think that's what that film was about. It's about watching, Fright Night's about watching horror films, and watching horror films that, you know, normally aren't that particularly scary, but they are enjoyable, you know. And I think that like say Roddy McDowall steals the show, it's Peter Vincent, a lovely homage to the horror genre, you know, because obviously Peter Vincent is, you know, Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And you know, and you have that character who's the sort of vampire hunter and all that, you know, and like you say, the effects are very good. I think Fright Night is a really great companion piece for The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys is a better film, right? I think The Lost Boys is an absolute classic within the vampire genre. However, I think what Fright Night is it's a different take on the vampire, really, in a lot of ways, but it still has that sort of 80s feel to it. And I think that the two films really complement each other because of that. I think one of the things I love about the film is that one of my other favourite films that are within the sort of what I would probably call sort of suburban horror, you know, I love, like, you know, The Burbs, which is, you know, an out comedy, really, but there's a lot of similarities, I think, between the Burbs and
particularly the first act of the
Fright
film.
Night, and you know, I do love that, the idea of, like, you know, you're sitting, you know, suburban areas. I live in a suburban area, and, you know, I've had people move to this area, and it's a nice enough area, but I know a lot of people that say it's really strange. There are a lot of strange characters in this place, and I have seen some crazy stuff where I live, right? Like, unbelievable stuff, just stuff that doesn't make sense, you know. And I think suburbia is a bit like that, and I think Fright Night has that, The Burbs has that, and I think obviously they're going on from, you know, the great sort of suburban voyeur sort of film, you know, Rear Window, you know, but that's really what it's about. So looking out your window and seeing, and, you know, you look at your neighbours and you think, is something going on, you know. I think that the film, when you compare it to American Werewolf in London, it's not frightening, really, so that's the main reason. I think American Werewolf in London is really scary in places, and I think that's where, if you make the comparison of it being a sort of comedy horror, then that would sort of fall down. But for me, it's a feel-good horror film. I think it's a forgotten classic of the 1980s. Most people that are aware of the film from that era really rate it highly, but it's not something that's really, really popular. As a sequel, which is fun enough, there's some good things in it. It's not as good as the original, and there's a remake coming out soon, which looks like a more serious take on the whole concept. So have you get anything else?
There was something I was going to say and I've forgotten what it was.
Cut.
It's I don't know, I kind of almost want to say maybe it's more of a teen film with horror elements to it than a straight up horror film. I mean, I do feel that it's got more kind of in common with the sort of teenage comedies of that particular, really of that time, than it does with the sort of horror takes in the genre. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned The Lost Boys. I mean, I've still to see that. Does that have the same kind of teen movie element to it?
Yeah, I haven't seen The Lost Boys. We'll go there. We will definitely go there and double feature. Awesome. That will be one that you'll watch soon. But yeah, I think it's a really great point as far as it's sort of taking the the sort of teen characters from films like Ferris Bueller's Day
Mm.
Off and stuff like that, and then putting them in a sort of horror environment, and it is like that, you know.
And I think the other thing I was going to mention was I actually found the builder character, the kind of the Renfield, the assistant to the vampire.
Yeah.
I actually found him more intimidating than I did find the actual vampire himself.
That a lot of people say that about Salem's Lot, you know, the 1979 version. The same thing that most of the time you're dealing with the sort of sidekick character.
Yeah.
It's important for them to be intimidating. It's funny though, where I think like a lot of people call this film Gay Night because like the majority, like the guy who played Brewster's best friend, the one that said that famous catchphrase, you know,
you're so
you
cool, Brewster.
You're so cool, Brewster. I think he's a gay porn star.
Really? Jeez.
I think that's what he went on to do, and I think basically apart from the lead, I think like, you know, I may be wrong here, but I think like everyone sort of came out at different times.
Alright.
So not that there's a problem.
Yeah,
It's just quite funny that everybody did, you know.
Yeah, unexpected.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, will we move on to the next film?
Perhaps we should.
Summarise. Fright Night, I think, is a classic of the genre, and
yeah, very entertaining film.
okay, so this week the anime film that Alan subjected me to was Space Adventure Cobra, released in 1982. Space Adventure Cobra is a film. It's very difficult to try to summarise what it's about.
Yeah.
Basically, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a man called Cobra, and he was a wanted fugitive. And this character, Cobra, who has an arm that transforms into a gun, he's the most wanted man in the galaxy, and he ends up falling for this. Well, he gets involved with this female bounty hunter, Jane, who it turns out is one of 3 surviving descendants of this mythical planet, which is actually like a sort of floating ship. And there's this character called Lord Necron, who needs to try to use these 3 descendants, who are all sisters, to control this ship for a sort of devious ploy to try and cement his control over the galaxy.
Yeah, it's kind of ultimate power.
Yeah, it is very difficult. Honestly, trust me, it's very difficult to actually know what's going on in places.
We'll get to that in a minute.
So that is the most I can sort of summarise, but it is sort of a futuristic, severely futuristic story. I loved it. I
was glad to hear you say that,
loved
yeah.
it. Right, I thought it was fantastic. I think I really enjoyed. I watched the dub.
I should point out this is the old UK dub version with the soundtrack by Yellow.
Which again, I really enjoyed the soundtrack.
It fits it very well. Yeah.
So I would like to listen to the original soundtrack to see what the difference is. But I think that it's funny, right? Because the film, 1982. It's based on a manga series, which I think you said
it started in
1977, around about the same time as the original Star Wars, and I think that the film very much reminded me of some really bad science fiction films of the time, science fiction adventure films like Ice Pirates and stuff like that, films like that were made to try and capitalise on the success of Star Wars, but but it worked this time, and I think one of the reasons it works is that the animation is great. I really love the style of animation. I think that the characters are really enjoyable, but I think most of all because of the medium that it's in, because it's animated, it didn't seem quite as ridiculous as some of those Star Wars knockoffs. Now I'm not saying Space Adventure Cobra is a Star Wars knockoff, I'm just saying that it felt like it was one of those films in the wake of Star Wars. I think the character of Cobra very much felt like he had elements of other characters that I've seen before. I felt like he had elements of like Lupin from
definitely.
Cagliostro.
Like Lupin in space is one of
Yeah.
the descriptions that's quite often labelled.
It's very much feels like he's the same sort of character. He's obviously, I think, got a bit of Han Solo about him, you know, and so you can sort of see where the character's maybe sort of been put together from, but he's a really enjoyable hero. He's kind of an anti-hero in a way, but he's not so he's not like, you don't dislike him or anything like that. It's just he's a bit of a rogue. He's a lovable rogue, and I think that the character of Jane, I thought was excellent, and I have to say that again, it was another film that I actually found, you know, nowhere near as emotional as some of the Girl Who Leapt Through Time, but there were moments in it where some characters died.
Quite surprised at that. It is quite
really
affecting in places.
It was really touching, you know, and yeah, I love the whole thing. I think the Lord Necron, the which reminded me of like Chronicles of Riddick for some reason. Like it sort of reminded me of that sort of thing. He was a really good villain.
Yeah. There
were some nice twists in the tale, and it was quite long, I think, but it actually sped by. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's really exciting and enjoyable. So I would definitely recommend it. Really enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, I came to this having seen the TV series first, and I was quite surprised at how different the film actually is.
When was the TV series?
The TV series actually came after this, but I was kind of expecting that the film would either have been like a compilation of the material they were using in the series, or like a kind of a dry run for the series in a way. But it's actually quite a different take on it. It's both were directed by Osamu Dezaki, who sadly passed away in April of this year. That was one of the reasons that I chose this film just now, because it's a kind of mark his tragic passing, basically. But I think that Dezaki is quite known for his kind of tricksy kind of style of filmmaking, and I mean, did you notice like a lot of the kind of weird special effects that were going on? I mean, there's a lot of techniques that he draws upon here. There's like repetition of certain frames to make kind of a sort of speeded up effect. There's like overlays going on top of the sort of layering of the different cells on top of each other. Like there's the kind of like the cardiograph line that appears on the screen in one scene to show like Cobra's heart rate and stuff like that going on. And of course the big one is the postcard memories, where like the frame, you'll get like a freeze frame into kind of like a watercolor painting of what was going on in the scene. But I think that kind of style, I think, is actually this film, I think, is the best use of that kind of style that I've yet seen. I think it really works for this film. In the series is a different take on the plot. It's kind of more like a serial, like sort of a kind of Flash Gordon kind of feeling. Whereas I think the film is much more psychedelic and kind of tone. I think that's probably why it's so hard to sum up. It does feel like a sort of psychedelic dreamscape.
It is all over the place. There's no doubt about that. But it's not a film that is distracting because it's all over the place. It's just kind of like, it is a sort of adventure that's going all, you know, and you don't really know what's happening. You don't know why characters are doing certain things. It does come together kind of in the end, but you know, it's...
Well, I think that the narrative is a strange one, because I think the film, there are certain things that the film does that it does better than the series, and I think there are certain things that the series does better than the film in a way. I mean, I think certainly if you've seen the series beforehand, coming to the film, you would be quite surprised. I mean, there is enough here that you will be genuinely surprised at what happens. But I think the narrative ending of the film wasn't perhaps quite as strong as I'd hoped it might have been, but I think the series has the same problem now and again as well. I mean, I think one thing you got to remember is that when the manga that this was based on was written by a man called Buchi Terasawa, and he was a very young man when he started this. He was only 22 when he started Cobra at first, and it is reasonably faithful to his vision of the story. So I don't know, that's probably...
I think the only weakness I would say is that, like you say, in the end, there's a character who passes away quite early on in the film, and that character, I felt, should have been the person at the end of the film that was going to be making the ultimate sacrifice. You know, that should have been that should have been her. You know? Oh. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, no, I
but
think that's a fair point.
I think that would have had even more, you know. But I like the sort of wink, you know, to the camera, which is, you know, like, I can't remember exactly what Cobra says at the end, but it's kind of like, you know, this is only the beginning sort of thing. You know, there's going to be loads of other adventures. You know, I want to know where they're.
Well, there's not been in film form, but not a feature film, but the TV series was quite long running. I mean, it ran for 33 odd episodes, and there was another TV series recently, and the manga has continued intermittently, more or less, since it started. I mean, I don't know. It's not like a kind of ongoing series, but every now and again, Terasawa will put out another few kind of one-off adventures with Cobra, so it's still going.
So I mean, I would definitely say. Both films, you know, I would say Fright Night is a really great film from 1980s. I would say that Space Adventure Cobra, like, I really loved it. I really loved it, and I would recommend both.
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think I'm a bit biased in Cobra because, you know, I've made, I think I made a couple of other videos about the series anyway, so yeah.
I've always wanted to know what it was, and now I know finally what Alan's prattling on about.
Yeah.
So, next episode, I'll be giving Alan pornography, and he'll be giving me some hentai. So remember to check out the forums below, and we'll see you next time.